When the most powerful meeting in America veers off script, the world watches as the illusion of control begins to crumble. This is not just another day in Washington, but a moment where cameras captured the raw mechanics of power and the terrifying reality of a leadership vacuum. Executives stiffened and aides scrambled, while the very foundations of presidential gravitas seemed to dissolve in real time before a stunned global audience. We are peeling back the curtain on a White House session that left even the most seasoned political veterans feeling deeply unsettled about the future of our nation. Stick with me, because what happened behind those closed doors reveals the true state of American governance and the high stakes of a presidency ruled by impulse. The setting was supposed to be a masterclass in choreographed authority, featuring the leaders of the American energy sector and the weight of global economic policy. Instead, the room became a stage for a slow-motion collapse of focus and a startling lack of presidential instinct that no spin doctor could fix. As Donald Trump sat across from oil titans, his behavior shifted from a commander-in-chief to a man lost in a labyrinth of his own making. The air in the room grew heavy as the expected discussion on energy independence and national security was replaced by a rambling stream of consciousness. It was a moment that demanded the highest level of diplomatic precision, but what we witnessed was the unsettling sight of power drifting aimlessly. The unraveling began almost immediately with a barrage of repetitive self-congratulation that treated complex global conflicts as mere props for a personal performance. This was not a campaign rally where cheering crowds could mask the gaps in logic or the lack of a coherent policy direction. These were high-level executives and government officials who came expecting leadership but were met with confusing metaphors about armadas and unresolved conquests. Every sentence seemed to loop back to the same central theme of personal ego rather than the urgent needs of the American people. When a leader treats the machinery of government like a stage set for validation, the very stability of our markets and our national security hangs in the balance. The disconnect was so profound that it felt as though the president was speaking a language entirely detached from the economic realities facing our great nation. He discussed Venezuela as a conquered territory while simultaneously acknowledging its unresolved status, creating a fog of confusion that left experts and allies alike scratching their heads. In this room, the stakes were not just political but historical and financial, involving billions of dollars and the geopolitical leverage of the United States. Yet the focus remained on basking in flattery and absorbing approval like oxygen, while the actual substance of the meeting was tossed aside. If you believe that American leadership deserves more than just a performance, then make sure to comment your thoughts below and subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into the truth behind the headlines. The first undeniable crack in the facade appeared when Senator Marco Rubio realized the situation was spiraling beyond the control of any official protocol. Seated nearby, Rubio did something that no cabinet member ever wants to do on a live broadcast while the world is watching. He quietly slid a note toward the president, which was not a strategic correction but a desperate plea to return to the script. This simple piece of paper was a reminder to focus and move the meeting forward before the damage to our international standing became irreversible. Trump's reaction to this intervention was a mixture of confusion and irritation that further exposed how much he had already lost his place. By reading the note aloud, he turned a seamless transition into an uncomfortable spectacle that highlighted his inability to stay anchored to a serious policy discussion. As the oil executives tried to resume the conversation regarding production numbers and domestic energy security, the president's attention began to drift once again. His body language became restless and his eyes wandered the room as if the weight of the office had become an inconvenient burden. This was the moment where the atmosphere shifted from awkward political theater to a genuine alarm for the future of American institutional integrity. Leadership at this level requires sustained focus and an understanding of the long-term consequences that follow every word spoken in the Oval Office. Yet what we saw was a president mentally checking out of a critical meeting on international energy sanctions and the very leverage that keeps America ahead of its adversaries. The unpredictability reached a breaking point when he suddenly stood up in the middle of a live discussion to wander off toward the ballroom. He announced a desire to tour the space and admire the decor as if he were a tourist rather than the leader of the free world. In that freezing instant, the room went silent as aides panicked and executives exchanged worried glances that spoke volumes about the state of our government. This was not a casual aside or a joke, but a calculated abandonment of duty on a personal whim that sent shockwaves through the halls of power. The symbolism of a president walking away from a policy meeting to admire a room funded by the very interests seeking his favor is a warning for every patriot. It suggests a system where the wealth of a few depends on the distraction and the compliance of a leader who values applause over action. Even Fox News, which is often accustomed to smoothing over presidential excesses, felt the need to cut away from the live coverage. They recognized that the moment had become too damaging to air and too glaring to defend in front of a national audience. When a friendly media outlet decides that live transparency is a liability, it is a clear signal that the boundaries of acceptable leadership have been shattered. If you want to stay updated on how these moments impact our economy and our standing in the world, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community in the comments. We are witnessing a pattern where impulse is prioritized over preparation and ego is consistently placed above the heavy responsibility of the presidency. This is not just a single isolated lapse in judgment, but a distilled reflection of a leadership style that equates chaos with actual dominance. To protect the future of America, we must demand a return to the discipline and the focus that the gravity of the office requires. Every time the script is ignored for the sake of spectacle, the foundation of our democratic expectations is weakened further. The constant need for aides to steer the president back to reality shows a White House that is perpetually reacting to whims rather than executing a coherent national strategy. When the person at the center of the system refuses to recognize that the script exists for stability, the entire nation pays the price in uncertainty. Markets rely on predictability, and our allies rely on the assurance that American promises are backed by a leader who is fully present. When that presence becomes optional, the power effectively shifts to an unelected network of managers who must absorb the shock of every impulsive detour. This creates a dangerous hierarchy where flattery is rewarded more than the cold hard data needed to govern a superpower effectively. The institutional strain caused by this lack of focus is not just a headache for aides but a direct threat to the stability of the American system. Our presidency was designed to centralize power under the assumption of consistent competence and a respect for the gravity of the office. When that competence becomes inconsistent, our surrounding institutions must stretch to compensate in ways that are ultimately unsustainable for a global superpower. This constant stretching comes at a heavy cost in delayed decisions and mixed signals sent to our most critical international allies. We are seeing the normalization of behavior that was once unthinkable, such as abandoning a high-level policy meeting on a personal whim. This normalization lowers the bar for what we expect from our leaders and transforms distraction into a defining personality trait rather than a flaw. When improvisation is mistaken for leadership and confusion is reframed as authenticity, the very foundation of accountability begins to weaken and crumble. Beneath the surface, the dedicated professionals inside our government are forced to pick up the slack and translate impulsive remarks into actionable policy. They must constantly monitor markets for reactions to statements that were never intended to be official doctrine or even coherent thoughts. This tireless work of translation drains the institutional energy of our country and pulls focus away from the long-term planning we desperately need. In meetings where government authority and corporate interests overlap, there is already a natural tension that requires a firm and disciplined hand to manage. When executives see a president who responds more to flattery than to briefings, it reinforces the dangerous perception that American influence is merely transactional. This environment suggests that proximity to the Oval Office buys favor and that policy outcomes are shaped by personal rapport rather than the public interest. Trust in our institutions depends on the belief that decisions follow a rigorous process of analysis and a respect for established protocol. When that trust erodes, it does not happen overnight but through a steady and visible decline in the seriousness of our executive leadership. The consequences of this erosion extend far beyond a single administration and will shape the system that every future American leader will eventually inherit. When the precedent shifts from serious governance toward performative spectacle, the margin for error in our foreign and energy policies shrinks to a dangerous level. Sensitive signals are scrutinized by our adversaries, and any misreading can escalate rapidly into a crisis that puts American lives and interests at risk. These moments resonate because they crystallize broader concerns about the capacity of our leadership to manage the immense complexity of the modern world. If you believe that America deserves a leader who stays in the room when the stakes are highest, then hit the subscribe button and share your view in the comments below. As the meeting eventually limped back on track with aides steering the conversation, it became clear that the real work was happening around the president. Governance in this context has become an exercise in containment and damage control rather than a proactive display of national leadership and vision. The most revealing aspect of that day was the quiet acknowledgement by everyone in the room that unpredictability had become the defining feature of the office. This is a factor to be managed and endured by those tasked with preserving power rather than a quality to be celebrated as a strength. When a system adapts to instability instead of correcting it, the long-term resilience of our democracy is put into serious question. Figures like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have been thrust into roles where they function less as individual politicians and more as case studies in institutional survival. They must navigate a delicate balance between loyalty to the person and responsibility to the office while knowing that any intervention risks a public backlash. In this environment, modern governance begins to bend around a single personality, and the needs of the nation are often sidelined for the sake of ego. Aides and allies learn to anticipate detours and prepare for unpredictability by cushioning the impact of every erratic decision or abandoned meeting. This culture of redirecting conversations and framing disruptions as mere eccentricities serves to hide the warning signs from the American public. The media ecosystem also plays a critical role in this dynamic by either amplifying or muting these moments based on their own political alignments. Yet even within that framework, there are limits to what can be spun as strength when the reality of the situation is so visibly broken. The decision by a friendly outlet to cut away from the live broadcast signaled that a threshold of indefensibility had finally been crossed. This fracture matters because media coverage is supposed to stabilize our reality and signal what is acceptable and expected from our highest officials. When those signals falter, uncertainty spreads through our markets and among the allies who rely on the predictability of the American promise. Predictability is the quiet and often overlooked currency of global power that ensures our decisions follow a process even when the outcomes are contested. When that assurance weakens, a vacuum is created that is quickly filled by speculation and by adversaries who are looking to test our boundaries. Domestic agencies are left seeking clarifications that may never come, while the fundamental question of who is actually steering the ship remains unanswered. Leadership is not measured by the volume of one's voice or the confidence of a performance, but by the ability to prioritize information effectively. The spectacle of a president disengaging during a critical discussion shows a government that has become dangerously reactive and performative at its core. This dependency on intermediaries to translate impulse into policy creates its own hierarchy where flattery is rewarded over the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. Over time, this culture reshapes the decision-making process by narrowing the range of options and favoring actions that generate immediate but shallow approval. This is especially dangerous in the realm of energy policy, where a single offhand remark can move global prices and undermine years of leverage. When observers see a leader more engaged by the atmosphere of a room than by the analysis of a briefing, they adjust their expectations accordingly. Power then effectively shifts away from the elected figure to an unelected network of managers, which raises profound questions about our democratic accountability. If we allow the line between governance and improvisation to blur, we leave the American citizens wondering who is truly making the decisions that affect their lives. We must insist that the office of the presidency demands more than just a presence or a hunger for praise from those in the room. If you agree that accountability and focus are non-negotiable for the leader of the free world, please subscribe to this channel and join our discussion in the comments. Our system's health is measured by how it responds when stress reveals deep-seated weaknesses, and that day in the ballroom revealed a need for urgent correction. While containment strategies might keep the lights on in the short term, they do nothing to address the long-term resilience of our great nation. The most consequential story of that day unfolded off-screen in the silent calculations of those tasked with preserving power rather than questioning it. Every actor in the orbit of the presidency was forced to make an internal choice about how far they were willing to go to maintain the appearance of continuity. Figures like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have become less individual politicians and more case studies in the art of institutional survival. They are constantly navigating the delicate balance between loyalty to the executive and their fundamental responsibility to the American people. This tension is where modern governance begins to bend until it risks breaking under the weight of a single personality. Aides and allies have learned to anticipate these sudden detours by preparing complex contingency plans for every possible moment of unpredictability. Instead of correcting the instability, they focus on cushioning its impact by crafting statements that frame disruptions as mere eccentricities. This approach of smoothing over reactions and redirecting conversations hides the warning signs from a public that expects transparency and steady leadership. In a highly polarized environment, the fear of empowering political opponents often outweighs the natural impulse to confront internal problems. This cycle ensures that the machinery of government keeps running, but it does so at the cost of its own internal integrity. The media ecosystem further complicates this reality by shaping narratives that either reassure or alarm specific audiences based on political alignment. However, the cutaway by a traditionally friendly outlet signaled that even the most loyal supporters have their limits when it comes to defending the indefensible. This fracture in the narrative matters because the media is supposed to stabilize our understanding of what is normal and acceptable in high office. When those signals falter, it creates a ripple effect of uncertainty that voter and market alike find impossible to ignore. Predictability remains the quiet currency of global power, and without it our standing in the world begins to lose its value. When the assurance of a process-driven government weakens, it creates a vacuum that is inevitably filled by rumors and by adversaries seeking to test our national resolve. Our partners abroad begin to delay their commitments while domestic agencies seek clarifications that never seem to arrive from the top. It all comes back to the fundamental question of who is actually steering the ship of state when the leader is disengaged. Leadership is truly measured by the ability to absorb complex information and remain present when the rewards are not immediate. The spectacle of a president prioritizing atmosphere over analysis crystallizes a concern that has been whispered behind closed doors for far too long. Governance has become increasingly performative and reactive, which creates a new hierarchy that rewards flattery over the delivery of hard truths. This culture reshapes the decision-making process by favoring actions that generate a quick headline over those that require sustained patience. It is a dangerous path to follow, especially in foreign policy, where a single miscommunication can escalate into a national crisis. When power shifts from the elected leader to an unelected network of managers, the very concept of democratic accountability is put at risk. If you are as concerned as I am about the direction of our leadership, then please comment below and subscribe to this channel for more unfiltered analysis. Defenders might argue that this is simply the nature of modern politics, but there is a profound difference in degree and visibility here. Norms are not just arbitrary rules meant to constrain a leader, but are essential protections for the stability of our nation. When these norms weaken, the system becomes brittle and less resilient to the inevitable shocks of the global stage. This vulnerability does not announce itself with a loud siren, but accumulates quietly in meetings that drift and notes passed in desperation. We must ask if the institutions designed to support our leaders are now simply compensating for a total absence of engagement. History suggests that a system stretched to absorb constant unpredictability will eventually reach a breaking point that no aid can fix. That routine meeting with oil executives became a symbol of a normalization process where spectacle is allowed to substitute for stewardship. The question left for every American is not a partisan one, but a fundamental question about the nature of effective governance. We have to decide if we can remain a global leader when focus is intermittent and presence is treated as an optional luxury. The story of that day ends not in mockery but in a quiet and unsettling realization of what power looks like when attention fractures. The presidency is not a personality contest or a stage for personal affirmation, but a position that demands a sustained and serious presence. When the weight of the office is treated as a burden, the cost is paid in the slow erosion of our democratic expectations. Citizens do not just elect a person to a role, but they entrust an office with obligations that extend far beyond personal comfort. What we witnessed was a significant gap between the gravity of the role and the behavior on display for the entire world to see. No amount of staffing or scripting can ever truly substitute for an engaged and disciplined leader at the very top of the chain. The danger was not just one off-script meeting, but the fact that everyone in the room seemed so prepared for the inevitable chaos. When unpredictability is assumed as the baseline, the standards of accountability begin to soften until the line between governance and improvisation disappears. This is exactly where the role of the public becomes essential to the survival and the health of our democracy. Democracy does not run on autopilot, and it requires a citizenry that is willing to ask the most uncomfortable questions. We must evaluate our leaders based on their fitness and their focus rather than on slogans and the quality of the spectacle they provide. Understanding that power without discipline is not strength is the first step toward reclaiming the seriousness our government deserves. Charisma without concentration is not leadership, and our institutions cannot compensate indefinitely for a lack of engagement at the center of power. As we reflect on the image of the wandering leader and the scrambling aides, we must see it as a warning rather than a punchline. Extraordinary behavior becomes routine when it is repeated, and reversing that downward slide is a task that requires immense collective effort. The future of America hinges on whether we insist that the office of the presidency demands more than just a performance. We must decide if focus and coherence are non-negotiable qualities for anyone who seeks to lead the greatest nation on earth. The health of our system is measured by how it responds to stress, and that day revealed a system focused on containment rather than correction. While these measures may keep the lights on in Washington, they raise profound questions about our long-term resilience as a superpower. We cannot afford to lower the bar for leadership simply because it feels easier to look away from the unfolding confusion. If there is one enduring image from that day, it is the reminder that the responsibility to notice and respond has shifted back to the public. If you believe in the strength and the future of the United States, then it is time to demand a higher standard of accountability from our leaders. Thank you for staying with me through this deep dive, and I hope this analysis has given you a clearer perspective on the stakes we face. Don't forget to like this video, share it with a fellow patriot, and subscribe to the channel to ensure you never miss the truth about our government. We are the ultimate check on power, and our attention is the most powerful tool we have to preserve the American dream. The weight of the office must be matched by the character of the person holding it, and that is a standard we must never abandon.